Chapter 39 The Boss. Sera swallowed hard as the Gry shut the door behind her, simultaneously activating the blackout curtains to rise swiftly to reveal the extent of the immaculate yet sparsely furnished apartment. Sera had never been here before, but she recognized her city through the glass windows immediately. She was alone at the top of a building, the highest level, the echelon. Sera's gaze fled further upward as she stared at her reflection on the glass ceiling. Night was falling and thick drops of water were beginning to pound with an indistinct throb. Again Sera could not move. She searched for an alternative exit. There was none, except for the 100-something-foot drop from the tower windows. Every wall, except for the one that held the door the gyri just locked behind her, was made of glass. Sera let out a desperate whine of cruel frustration. If only she could get this bracelet off. The stone of liquid night was inhibiting every inch of her intuition. Sera thought about screaming, but she knew no one could hear her. Zane, what had become of him? She opted to stay silent, watchful, waiting for when the boss would show their wicked face. Lightning flashed through the sky as Sera worked at the bindings tied around her arms. She'd already kicked her feet loose with a quick trick Morval had shown her in the art of escape. That memory felt like years ago. Sera's head snapped up as she heard a rusty key turning slowly into the battered wooden door in front of her. She carefully crossed her legs at the ankle, tucking them under the chair and into shadows to avoid detection. She fixed her face into a neutral, possibly even bored stare as the door swung open. Sera was startled just for a moment, as a drop of poison seemed to roll through her body, settling in her gut. But it was overridden by true relief. She gasped, hopeful tears bursting from her eyes. "Mom!" she cried, her alleviation so great. Hestia smiled at her daughter, rushing forward as she dropped to her knees in front of her. Sera noticed her mother's gaze was filled with tears as well. "Oh my darling," she breathed heavily, wrapping her arms around her only child. "Mom," Sera sobbed, trying to get as close to her mother as possible, as close as her shackles would allow. Sera pulled back, a brilliant smile on her face, though her eyes were filled with subconscious anxiety. "Quickly, get me out of these. We have to get out of here," she exclaimed with urgency as her mother's arms tightened around her shoulders. "Mother, quickly, before the boss arrives." Sera stopped. Her brain was firing on all cylinders as Sera Hastings pulled back slowly and stared her daughter straight in the eyes. "I'm so happy you're safe," she whispered, caressing her daughter's cheek. "Welcome home." Sera jerked from her grasp, her arms straining against the bindings, against the bracelet. Her feet, she realized, were still hidden. "Home?" Sera questioned, as her mother continued to stare at her with adoration. "Yes, Hastings Apartments," she assured, getting slowly to her feet and taking a few steps back. She looked down at Sera with a stern motherly expression. "I was worried sick about you. I had no idea where you went, only that you were in the clutches of a monster," she went on, her eyes wrapped with distress. "What kind of mother would I be if I just abandoned you to such a fate?" She frowned at the thought, turning to gaze out at the gloomy sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. "I was," all Sera could say before her mother cut her off. "And Lonnie?" Hestia's eyes lit with sympathy as she flicked her fingers upwards, igniting dozens of candles placed throughout the room. "He was blaming himself for your disappearance. He was impossible to console after everything he sacrificed," she sighed with distress. Did her mother just perform magic? What sacrifice? Why was she still strapped to this chair? Her mother paced a few times, in deep thought before turning to once again smile at Sera with adoration. "My, you've become even more beautiful. Gods know you didn't get it from your father." She let out a little laugh as she dabbed at her eyes and softly sniffled. "Mom!" Sera felt her mind snapping at her reality diverging. What was this? "Aren't you here to help me?" Sera knew the answer before the question even left her mouth. "Of course I am, darling," she insisted, once again stepping close and placing a kiss on Sera's feverish forehead. "This is the only way to keep you safe for now. As soon as the threat is neutralized, you will be free to go." "No." Sera bit out, shocked at her outburst. She'd never yelled at her mother once in her life, but she would not accept this excuse. "What? What threat? Why are you doing this to me?" "To protect you, Sera. Perhaps you don't realize, but some creature off the streets is after you. He is not a man. He is beneath you. I understand that he probably lied and manipulated you into running away. You aren't in any trouble, darling. You haven't betrayed Lonnie, not really. Of course I'm the tiniest bit disappointed about you almost breaking our deal, but I know you didn't do it on purpose. Forgive you. After all, before you are anything else, you are my daughter." Sera felt something crack. A fissure in the depths of her chest. "I'm not just your daughter. I'm my own person too. All these years you've stifled me, kept me under your control. I thought I had freedom, but it was only when I was playing by your rules. Sera could stop the words bursting from her lips, her heartbreak so great. You're the one who betrayed me. Sera felt herself gasp, her mind connecting the dots. You sent Gry after me, didn't you? Left me alone my whole childhood. And for what? What do you really do here? Why would you bring me to this place when you've always told me it's not safe? What are you involved in? Why did you not tell me you had magic? I need answers. Her mother smiled lovingly. And you will have them, dear, as soon as that creature is subdued. Zane! Sera's eyes churned with grief. She was beside herself. This would be the thing to break her. Zane! Hestia whispered. Zane, is that what he calls himself? Sera, Zane means nothing. He had no right to take you from Lonnie. Look how he has turned you against me. A single tear softly slid down her face. I will punish him for this. I love him. Sera screamed. I love him, Mom, please. She begged, not as a powerful being, not as a human woman, but as a daughter, asking the person who'd created her to give her this one small piece of happiness. Rest now, darling, all will be well soon, she whispered, nodding meekly before turning towards the door. Hestia walked away with a slow, solemn gait, as if she had all the time in the world. I'll never forgive you. Sera's voice tore as the essence of betrayal once again infused into her soul. Hestia paused, her head turning slightly as she contemplated the fate of her magnificent daughter. You'll see reason. She moved towards the door. That's not a promise, darling. It's a threat. That Zane would surely be on his way here to find her most prized possession. Number 1 informed her he'd been left alive. Sera Hastings was ready. It was time to release her tenants, and let them have a taste of true freedom. Hestia snapped her fingers as the creatures living in her building felt their powers renewed, their obsidian bands snapping off and falling to the floors. Sera shrieked with defiance as the wooden door shut with a deafening thud, the cracks widening in her heart as she accepted that her mother was the true monster. Chapter 40. Contenders' Cooperation. They stood in front of the dank and run-down-looking entrance of the city subway. Zane smirked to himself as Lonnie's features clashed against the dying sun. The rain would be coming soon. Dark clouds were gathering overhead as the most magnificent sunset they'd ever witnessed disappeared under the horizon. The towering structure of Hastings' apartments stretched across the city skyline. I can't believe I agreed to this, Lonnie muttered, his eyes on the filthy and crumbling stairs that Zane began to move down. I must be insane. Join the club, Zane quipped. He felt as if he were in a particular position of power. This was his turf. Lonnie was out of his element. Besides, Zane had information. He knew things that proved his intimacy with Sera. She wanted him, not Lonnie. It didn't really matter, now that Zane knew their marriage was arranged. It gave him even more reason to taunt his adversary with his newfound glory, as well as interest. The two jogged down the steps and onto the deserted platform. You've told me nothing, only that Sera needs our help, Lonnie snapped. His gaze shifted to Zane as he weighed the crowbar in his hand, looking around to see if there were any other travelers. Not a soul in sight. Lonnie had never taken the subway in his life. I see your arm healed, Zane commented lightly, watching as the other man's grip tightened around the cold steel. Lights glowed from deep inside the tunnel that Zane peered down as the subway train rattled towards them. Where is Sera? Lonnie was nearing the end of his patience. Zane sighed. It's a long story, but I'll give it to you in short. Sera was helping me with a personal problem. Nothing nefarious like you are thinking, she just happened to have expertise on my condition, he finished vaguely. The train doors opened and they got on. The car was deserted except for an older man who was sleeping on several bags of garbage. Lonnie wrinkled his nose with distaste at the smell. Zane shrugged and sat down. Lonnie stood, eyeing the seats as if they were covered with plague. He refused to touch anything. His gaze turned back to Zane with suspicion. What condition? It's not important. Anyway, Zane went on, cutting over Lonnie's biting response. Some person is after us. We escaped and went on the run. Now Sera's been taken hostage, here in the city. I don't know what they want from her, other than her magic. Lonnie's eyes widened at the term, magic? He sighed, as if he might have been expecting this. Zane paused as a little old lady bustled onto the train, the doors closing swiftly behind her. She halted in her tracks when she spied the odd couple with their weapons. Zane and Lonnie both nodded respectfully towards her as she let out a little huff. Weirdo cosplayers all over the place these days. She hurried on down the car, casting shifty glances back at them. Lonnie lowered his voice. You're sure it's magic? Zane nodded, frowning at Lonnie's unyielding devotion to Sera no matter what she was. Yes, mystical power or whatever you want to call it. I watched her blow a gry to pieces. A what? Lonnie's hands and feet were spread out, balancing his weight to keep from falling over as the train began to move, gathering speed. Zane watched him as if he were a mildly amusing circus act. Never mind, it's besides the point. We need to get into Hastings' apartments, that's where she's being held. Lonnie's face shone with pure shock, denial, confounded disbelief. Finally he settled on rage. So this was her plan? He muttered to himself. Whose plan? Zane questioned. Lonnie's jaw ticked with emotion as the train lumbered through the underground tunnels with furious speed. He was nauseous from the shaking and swaying, but there was no way he was going to sit on the germ-ridden roller coaster. Zane called over the deafening sound of screeching tracks as they took a sharp turn, speeding them north towards their destination. What do you know? Lonnie threw him a grim frown. Not enough. They exited the subway and returned the city streets, which Lonnie was infinitely thankful for. Never again, he thought to himself. It was beginning to mist around them, the growing fog providing them generous coverage. Both men's eyes were glued to the ominous building, still a few miles away, but even from here they could not see one light from within. No public transportation would take them past this point. They'd travel the rest of the way on foot. Zane had been insistent that they wait until it was completely dark to infiltrate the place. In the meantime, he wanted to know more about Sera's past, and Lonnie's inside knowledge on the family dynamics. If Lonnie's family had been connected to Sera's for a significant span of time, it was a given that they would hold one another's dangerous secrets. The wind blew with fierce agitation as they disappeared down the empty street. So, Zane began, his voice dripping with conquest, you and Sera are arranged. Lonnie turned slowly, surveying the other man's cocky strut. He didn't want to imagine what had gone on over the course of the chaotic chase this idiot dragged Sera on. But he would end Zane's delusional fantasy. Here and now. In other terms, she is promised to me as I am to her. Lonnie bit out smoothly, relishing the look of angst that slashed across Zane's features. She doesn't love you, Zane taunted softly. Lonnie's scar stood out in contrast against his pale skin, his worst fears thrown back in his face. But his calm rage was directed towards the one who'd caused all of this chaos. The shadow. That's only because I haven't told her the truth, Lonnie supplied with a small smile of victory, hiding his seething temper. Zane grimaced at the word truth. He wasn't sure what it meant anymore. He'd been truthful with Sera, hadn't he? The truth, Lonnie stressed, his sharp profile once again turning to look at the towering building where his love was trapped, is that I never committed any crime. I only took the fall. He spoke with supreme confidence. Why? Zane couldn't help the astonishment in his voice. It was clear Lonnie wasn't lying. Sera's mother, she got in over her head. She was days away from losing it all, her business, name, reputation. She'd been swindling, stealing from the working people of this city. All for her own personal project. Zane's eyes snapped to him with furious inquiry. Lonnie continued, don't ask me what it was. I don't know. Though recently, I am convinced it's connected to my father and his manufacturing company. I've never taken particular interest in the family business, much like Sera. He bit his lip as he recalled a particularly sweet memory. She always knows what I need. Zane's temper soared, and before he could stop himself, the words came flying from his lips. She's not yours. Lonnie's face morphed into a snarl. I'd do anything for Sera, he swore. She doesn't need you. She doesn't need anyone. Fine. Fine. Some unspoken thought passed between them. Both Zane and Lonnie were aware that there was a much larger threat than they originally assumed. Larger than each other. Tell me about Sera's mother, Zane pressed. Lonnie let out a low breath. I think she truly believes that she acts out of loyalty to Sera. She's convinced herself that any horrible thing she might do is in the name of protecting her daughter. And lightning struck, reaching for the sky with electric force. Lonnie's eyes flashed. She's mad. Crazy powerful. I don't know exactly what she is. Only that she wields incredible magic. Zane snarled. And you never thought to inform Sera of this? Lonnie scoffed at his ignorance. Why would I put that burden on her? You have no clue what our society demands of us. Do you know what that information would do to Sera if it got out? So you sacrificed everything. Your reputation, your relationship, hell, your freedom. Lonnie looked away. He didn't speak for several moments. All was silent before thunder cracked and the sky suddenly opened up. Rain poured down onto them, attempting futilely to cleanse them of their sins. I did it for her. Everything I do, it's for Sera, he confessed softly. What do you mean, for Sera? Enough, Lonnie shut down. You have your secrets, I'll keep mine. Zane wondered what kind of deal he'd struck. If she refuses to marry you, what will you do? I would never force her, but once she knows the truth. He let the end of his sentence hang in uncharted territory. It shredded Zane's nerves to pieces. That you're innocent? Though you've still lied to her all of these years? Coward before a woman who would manipulate her own daughter. Lonnie growled in warning. Who exactly do you think you are? You storm into Sera's life, throwing her onto a dangerous path, putting her very existence at risk. Who are you to judge me? I didn't ask for this. She just found me, Zane admitted. I tried to ignore her, tried to push her away. Lonnie's heart clenched at the expression on the other's man's face. It was the same one he was sure he was wearing. Love. For Sera. She's impossible, Lonnie conceded. Zane agreed wholeheartedly. But she needs our help. Lonnie responded with conviction. Rest assured that where we find Sera's mother, we will also find Sera. Zane's temper was rising. He couldn't imagine what this deception was doing to Sera. If she's capable of inflicting this kind of emotional trauma on her only child, what else will she do? Lonnie's face twisted with a scowl. Sera's mother, Hestia, she's the one who gave me that sword. She twisted my mind into going after you. I've never fought with a sword in my life before that night. Zane looked up in surprise. Interesting. She must have sent the Gry after us as well. Lonnie didn't argue before going on. Sometimes she appears as a shadow, a smoky substance that can flit in and out of your brain like a parasite. She goaded me that night. Suggested that you and Sera were together. Zane's response left no room for argument. We were. Lonnie glared at him. When do we make our move? Soon, Zane answered, his eyes once again glued to the skyline. Just then, lights shone through the gloom, illuminating the top of the apartments. Both of them stopped suddenly, their soaking wet heads staring up at their haunting destination. They were still good distance away. And once Sera knows the truth, Lonnie questioned, trying to hide his insecurity, the implications that Zane suggested were eating away at his brain. Are you willing to accept that the better man will win? Zane huffed with laughter as he threw Lonnie a wicked sneer. Of course, as long as that man is. Chapter 41, Tides of Truth. They were silent for a long time. Both Lonnie and Zane's thoughts consumed with the woman trapped at the top of the skyline. They took their time navigating the desolate streets, always watching for someone, or something in the shadows. Neither were sure how this evening would end, especially with the possibility that they might not survive. But that was a chance they were both willing to take, in the name of freeing Sera. You're hiding something. Lonnie gritted his teeth with frustration as Zane glowered at his side. You're not giving me the full story. Neither are you, Zane shot back, the short threads of his patience fraying with every step. He was consumed with anxiety, his thoughts focused on Sera's well-being. What was she going through right now? I don't owe you an explanation, Lonnie sneered, switching gears. You've known Sera for what? A week? What makes you think she trusts you? Zane gave the furious man a lazy smile as he thought back to his and Sera's adventures, their training sessions, the hot springs. Lonnie's gaze darkened further at Zane's expression. Are you positive that Sera has magic? Zane nodded. I saw it with my own eyes. Obviously it's something inherited from one or both of her parents. And to answer your previous question, Sera trusts me because of our connection. Lonnie scoffed with disbelief. What connection? Zane sighed. He wasn't going to stop irritating him. He supposed Lonnie had come clean about his jail time. It was only fair he filled him in with some hard truth. I was not always a human. Zane frowned as he continued to scan the streets. It was too quiet, even for this part of town. No sound reached his ears but the falling rain. Lonnie threw him a sharp glance. What does that mean? It means I am trapped in this human form. And Sera, for some unknown reason, is the only one who can see what I truly am underneath. You're cursed? It all makes sense now, Lonnie laughed bitterly. So that's why Sera has been tagging along after you? She wants to help, doesn't she? That's what she wanted at first, Zane emphasized. But now, she wants a whole hell of a lot more. Lonnie grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, his snarling face inches from Zane's. Sera has the habit of mixing up concern and care. Don't mistake them. It was Zane's turn to laugh. You've got a bad case of denial, man. Lonnie punched him in the face. Zane let him. He turned back, rubbing his jaw, his lips split. Sera's going to be pissed when she sees what you did to my perfect face. Shut your mouth. Lonnie stalked away, continuing on towards their destination, his fist throbbing from the blow, though it was nothing compared to the pain in his chest at the other man's words. Zane smirked and caught up with him quickly. So now that I gave you a bit of information, why don't you tell me the real reason you decided to lie to Sera and let Hestia ruin your life? What was in it for you? You couldn't possibly understand my life, so stop trying. Zane was relentless. Are you just some pathetic lapdog, doing the bidding of a magical being with no morals? Lonnie tried not to let Zane's words get to him, but his question slammed into his brain, propelling his fury. It was all worth it, every second, if it means Sera will be my wife. Zane sneered at the word wife. Was that the deal then? Exchange your soul in order to keep your hold on Sera, no matter the cost. Lonnie stared at him with cold, truthful eyes. There's no cost I wouldn't pay to be with Sera. Zane squeezed his hands into fists instead of strangling his rival. I told you she doesn't love you. Lonnie relished the insecurity in his tone. It sounds to me as if you're trying hard to convince yourself of that, when in reality, Sera and I have a deeper relationship than you could ever possibly understand. Once she knows everything I did was for her, to protect her from the fallout of her mother's decisions, those feelings will come back. Whatever spell you've weaved over her will be broken. Zane's features hardened with conviction. It's no spell. It's love. Lonnie turned his head slowly to look at him. What did you say?
Sera love me.
He scoffed. She likes fixing broken things. Clearly the reason she agreed to marry you. Do you want me to hit you again that badly? I'm just stating facts here. Enough. Zane bit his tongue. He was itching to tell this fool exactly what made him so confident. But he would let Sera do the honors and bring Lonnie's dreams crashing down all around him, right? Her finesse confession wouldn't turn her feelings away from him so easily, would it?
No.
Zane was sure of it. Sera had let him see the depth of her heart. She'd only been trying to convince herself to have romantic feelings for Lonnie. There was no way she'd give up what they had now, especially for someone who'd kept her in the dark for so long. Tell me more about Sera's power, Lonnie demanded as they traveled further north, the scenery around them becoming even more despondent. Rats skittered by, broken windows gaped like wailing mouths. Even the cracked pavement beneath their feet seemed to crumble with every step they took. Sera is half Dekla. Before Lonnie could interrupt with his lack of knowledge, Zane continued. She's a magical being with a whole slew of deadly skills we haven't entirely figured out. She has only been able to access her dark power once. Dark power? Lonnie was frowning. Yeah, like a torrent of wind, purple light exploded out of her. She hasn't figured out how to control it. Yet. I've never seen Hestia display anything like that. Sera's powers are rare, Zane explained. We learned that someone like her hasn't been seen on the island for thousands of years. Then how was she captured? If her strength is so immense. Zane paused, a forgotten memory coming back to him with intense shock. Lonnie glanced over when he didn't answer. Why are you staring like you've seen a ghost? I just remembered they trapped her power, he said more to himself as he picked up his pace. Lonnie hurried to catch up. What are you talking about? The creature, the Gry that took Sera right before they left. She put a bracelet on Sera's arm. As soon as it locked around her wrist, her magic died out instantly. Do you mean to tell me that Sera is in that building, being held prisoner with absolutely no way to magically defend herself? Zane didn't bother to inform him the building was also most likely crawling with monsters. He'd mentioned that once they got there, Sera always has some way to defend herself, but yes, essentially she is powerless. The two hadn't realized they were running, puddles splashing behind them as they tore across the city streets, their hearts beating a wild race against time. She should be safe, Lonnie insisted. Hestia wouldn't physically harm her. But he didn't sound entirely convinced. You're positive? Zane snapped. Almost. Zane pushed himself into a sprint. Lonnie increased his speed to match his foes. We need to get that bracelet off of her. Will she blow up the building once we do? Lonnie questioned with slight panic. I sure hope so, was Zane's Chapter 42 call to action. Their steps slowed as they neared the final block of their journey. There, at the end of the long desolate street, was the entrance to Hastings' apartments. It was deserted of life, just as it was all the times Zane had passed by here. He turned to look at Lonnie, who was inspecting his surroundings with a sharp eye. Have you been here before? Zane questioned softly. They were still a good distance away, but he was still concerned with being overheard. They'd have to sneak in, and hope they could avoid anything lurking on the many floors of the building. Lonnie shook his head. Never. But my father's factory is a few blocks east. Lonnie frowned. Zane's eyebrows slowly rose with curiosity. What exactly does your father manufacture? Lonnie laughed at the question, his mind swinging to pain. All sorts of things. But I've never heard him mention anything that has to do with magic. What about weapons? I'm sure. Might be worth a quick look. Could be something to help us out. Right, Lonnie hesitated. He'd purposely avoided pissing off his father all these years for a multitude of reasons, just to end up in jail. What difference did it make now? Follow me. They were only stopped by one guard, who came storming over to them with pompous importance and indignation written across his face. Excuse me, who are you? Lonnie handed his identification over with an icy glare that would make his father proud. The guard's eyes widened. Oh, Mr. Barron, I apologize most profusely, I didn't recognize you. He bowed over and over. Don't let it happen again, Lonnie growled. Zane patted the guard on the head before stepping inside. The warehouse was massive and thankfully empty. You were good back there, Zane admitted. Just like real corporate villain. Let's make this fast, Lonnie whispered. Zane was already stalking down the aisles lifting lids off boxes, searching and then moving on. Lonnie worked his way through a pallet stacked almost to the ceiling with long boxes. He used the crowbar to slice open the packaging and peeled it aside. There were stacks and stacks of bracelets of all sizes, made from black stone that glimmered strangely. He frowned in confusion. Aha! He heard Zane's hiss of triumph and quickly went to see what he'd gotten into. What is it? Lonnie asked, nearing his adversary who turned suddenly. Zane was wearing an excited grin and holding tranquilizer guns in each hand. He tossed one to Lonnie. These will be perfect, he insisted, filling his pockets with as many cartridges as he could carry. He motioned for Lonnie to do the same. Lonnie scowled but moved forward to help. For what exactly? Zane figured that he should probably let Lonnie in on that little tidbit. Listen, he began as Lonnie's face darkened at his tone with wary dislike. I'm not exactly sure what or who we are going to find in that building, but I'm certain we are bound to encounter a few unpleasant beings, probably not operating entirely of their own free will, before we can get to Sera. Let's try not to kill anything if we don't have to. Could you be any less specific? Monsters, beasts, etc. Zane turned towards him ready to go. Great. And you have no powers, right? Since you're in human form. Lonnie bit out, stalking back towards the exit. Zane nodded grimly at his side. That's right, we are just two humans going up against a slew of magical creatures. And you want my help, why? In the hopes of killing me off without having to do the deed yourself. I bet you like your steak well done, Zane muttered, throwing Lonnie a shady glance. He put a few extra feet of distance between them. What the hell are you saying? Lonnie snapped, his patience nearly used up on this ridiculous lunatic. Nothing, Zane would ask Sera about it when this was over. They would have a good laugh at Lonnie's expense. I asked for your help because you claim to know Sera better than I do. You've spent years learning all sorts of things about her mother. I figured you'd know something that I don't. Besides, I'm sure you would have thrown a hissy fit if I hadn't invited you along. They slid back out into the night. Lonnie gave the guard a sharp glare before threatening. Make sure to keep your mouth shut. Zane chimed in. Or you'll regret it. Lonnie threw him a nasty glare, and waited until they were out of ear reach before adding. I don't know how Sera can stand your company. She thinks I'm ridiculously charming. Lonnie laughed at his absurdity. You could never make Sera happy. Zane scowled but his voice was filled with complete confidence. I already have. Lonnie bit the inside of his mouth to stop his next words. He would get nowhere with this idiot. He was under the severe delusion that his Sera would break her promise. She'd never done such a thing in all the years he'd known her. He was positive that she would not throw away everything they had just for a fling with some puffed-up, arrogant narcissist. So instead, he attempted to ignore the jab and pressed on with their mission. Hastings Towers was still completely silent as they approached. The two crept forward, setting up their lookout point behind a dilapidated garbage dumpster. The rain was still pouring down, but thankfully the night was fully upon them. The lack of illumination coming from inside the apartments would hopefully work to their advantage, unless they were up against creatures who didn't need eyes to sense them. What now? Lonnie ordered impatiently. We stay as quiet as possible. Work our way up and hopefully get her out of there before anything or anyone has the chance to stop us. You really don't realize what you're up against. Hestia isn't just going to hand Sera over to you. And if Hestia sees me, she will assume I'm also here to kick your ass. Well, we all know how great that worked out for you last time. Has anyone ever told you how incredibly obnoxious you are? Zane opened his mouth to reply when suddenly the Gry, the one who'd viciously stabbed him with her claws, came striding out through the front doors of the apartments. Zane's hand itched to swing his bat down into her skull with retribution. Besides the fact that she'd nearly killed him, she'd made an even bigger mistake. removing Sera from his life. Number 1 stood quite still, glancing carefully in both directions before she reached her long spindly arms up and lifted her head back. She waited. From Zane and Lonnie's sight line, it looked as if she were murmuring some kind of incantation. The two watched as her form slowly disappeared, becoming invisible. They noted the concealed footsteps splashing through the rain-ridden street, as the creature took off in the opposite direction and out of their sight. What the hell was that? Lonnie's eyes were wide. Just one less monster we have to deal with, Zane encouraged. Lonnie hissed with irritation, trying to shake off his shock. I can't believe this is your plan. Do you have a better one? Lonnie stewed silently beside him. All right then, let's go. Zane moved quickly, simultaneously grabbing the baseball bat that was strapped to his back and gripping it tightly. Lonnie's crowbar was already raised as they dashed towards the doors. Zane took a deep breath, his hand reaching out to open the entrance. It was locked. Brilliant, Lonnie snapped, dropping the crowbar to his side with utter frustration. Just brilliant. What now? Zane's face shone with grim determination as he swung the baseball bat up. Plan B. Before Lonnie could remind him of his order to be silent, Zane brought the bat down with all the force in his body. The nails embedded in the top of the bat connected with the tinted glass door, shattering it into a million pieces. Lonnie stared in horror as all sorts of sounds erupted from the blackened depths of inside. Screams, shrieks, and hisses inundated their ears. Lonnie gave him a nasty, sarcastic look. Well, I'm sure if no one noticed our arrival, they have now. But Zane was too focused, too filled with adrenaline to give him more than an exasperated glance. No time to worry about it, come on. Zane and Lonnie stood side by side, recognizing the difficult task they were destined to face, each offering one another a nod of solidarity, a proclamation of trust. They started forward, knowing that the second they crossed the threshold of this space, they were no longer enemies but two men who were dedicated to the exact same cause. They disappeared into the darkness together, weapons raised, heads held high and ready to risk it all for the woman. Chapter 43 Monster Bash. The second they stepped into the cavernous entrance hall, all sound ceased. Zane glanced to his right, Lonnie searched left. There was nothing. Why did they all go silent? Lonnie whispered. Suddenly 2 security guards came rushing forth out the darkness beyond. Their swift, though lumbering figures resembled giant rocks on thick legs. Zane and Lonnie took aim, their tranquilizers firing one second after the other. Both shots deflected off the creature's dark orange skin. Zane and Lonnie both jumped out of the way as the guards seamlessly dove head first, tumbling into the shape of giant boulders, their bodies folding without missing a step as they attempted to steamroll over the intruders. Aim for their chests, Zane shouted as the guards unfolded and returned to their feet. Depe had only one soft spot on their rock-hard exteriors, right between the lungs. They took aim again. They shot 3 more rounds of tranquilizers at the giant rolling guards until they were able to strike the Depe down. The creatures collapsed slowly, fighting the sleeping serum until it finally took over. Rock dwellers, Zane offered, pointing to the Depe's cracked, rust-colored skin and thick fingers shaped for digging. Wonder what the hell they are doing all the way up here? This place certainly has the same ambience of being underground, Lonnie remarked, his eyes inspecting the creatures before moving on. Carefully though swiftly, they made their way to the center of the room. There, in contrast to the white marble floors, stood a winding staircase. Its railings were carved and shaped from various bones. Some of the bones had been snapped in half, the sharp splinters resting on top of the banisters. Zane looked up, mesmerized by the glowing light that sat all the way at the top of the deadly-looking stairs. The steps were slick black stone, a dark substance slowly oozing over them. They might not even get to face another monster before they broke their necks. They began their ascent. They reached the first landing without a problem. They paused to look down the long hallway that cut off on either side of them. There were 2 doors, one to the left and one to the right. They nodded silently to one another as each took off in their respective directions. Lonnie gripped the doorknob as Zane held up 3 fingers. Lonnie nodded, watching his hand intently. 3, 2, 1. They swung open the doors, lifting their weapons. A horrible stench permeated their senses. Years' worth of dust and slime coated the place. Zane looked around, the room was empty, but he couldn't ignore the long-ago dried blood, multiple kinds of blood, staining the floors, the walls. Lonnie's situation was identical. He'd seen and smelled some awful things in prison, but this room, it made his knees weak with anxiety. What occurred here? How much time passed since anyone opened this door? Lonnie's features settled into a disturbed expression. Zane came rushing in. Let's move. With one last glance at the sinister scene before them, The men made their way to the second floor. The setup was identical. Once again they found more of the same. These rooms also hadn't been touched in a very long time. Their urgency was growing by the second. The third floor also yielded similar results. How many floors are there? Lonnie spat, desperation clear across his face. It doesn't matter, Zane bit out, fighting the wave of panic that was attempting to consume him. We have to keep going. They neared the 13th floor with trepidation. This was the first time they heard sound coming from inside one of the apartments. Lucky 13, Zane whispered, once again raising his bat as he moved to the right. Maybe for you, Lonnie returned. Block 13 had been his prison cell. They knocked on the doors simultaneously. After all, creatures lived here, didn't they? The doors flew open. They were not ready. The shrieking of deranged insects sliced through their skulls. There were hundreds of them. Baseball-sized bugs, the sagi. Their multiple vicious yellow eyes sparkled with malevolence and hunger. Spikes protruded from their bodies. Lonnie attempted to slam his door shut, finally managing to send most of the bugs back inside. He looked over to Zane, who was swinging like mad, sending bugs splattering against the walls as they swarmed around him, their screeches rising in a crescendo as they attempted to sting him. Get out! Leave our home! The sagi chanted over and over. Lonnie was frozen, watching the screaming insects for several moments before joining in, expelling only a modicum of his pent-up rage. Most of the sagi escaped their weapons and retreated back into the apartment with the force of their wings slamming the door shut behind them. They took to the oil-slicked stairs, panting heavily. I hate bugs, Zane hissed as he swiped at a rogue sagi who narrowly missed his bat and buzzed back off to its home. Lonnie agreed. 14, 15, 16. Bam! Lonnie was thrown clear across the hall and into the far wall, as a furious-looking beast with one large eye, its body covered with thick matted hair, stalked on 3 legs towards the fallen man. You come for mistress? I kill you, it roared, stomping all its feet. Zane moved quick, bringing the dull side of his bat down across the creature's neck. It howled and turned to make mincemeat of its attacker. Zane backed himself into the creature's apartment. Baradas weren't normally vicious creatures, but this one looked as if it had been through hell. Its normally thick fur was falling out in multiple places, probably due to stress. Its eye was nearly blind. Protect mistress. The walls trembled at the strength of its voice. Zane waited until the stumbling being made its way towards him, listening for the sounds of his heavy breathing. Lonnie got to his feet and raised the tranquilizer. The Barada lifted its head as the needle hit the side of its neck. It lumbered towards Zane, furiously enraged. Zane made a quick dash for the door, slamming it shut. The creature bellowed as they heard its heavy body hitting the floor. Zane looked down at the tranquilizer. Guess your father is good for something. Lonnie let out a short laugh, surprising both of them. Thanks. Lonnie rubbed his back with a wince. Zane nodded at the Barada's door. You too. Let's get out of here before he wakes up. The disheveled but determined duo climbed to the next floor, slipping and sliding on the stone stairs which were somehow becoming more slick with each turn they passed. Both men had resigned themselves to the fact that they were committed to checking every apartment in this building. So on they went 25-30. They braced themselves, waiting for another enraged monster to flip out at their audacity to disturb their peace. Some slammed doors in their faces, others attacked without asking questions, chasing them up multiple flights of stairs and back down. From what they could gather, the creatures living here were completely content to do so, and basically worshipped the ground that Sera Hastings sauntered across. Some claimed they felt safe, others said she saved their lives. Some snapped that it was none of their business and they shouldn't be here. No humans allowed. So far they'd gotten away with minor scrapes, burns, scratches and a couple of hits that were already forming into nasty bruises. Neither complained, both pushed on. Creature after creature, they worked together in a dance of battle, tossing weapons, creating distractions and putting their brute force together to subdue the violent. They used their skills of charm and intelligence, gently leading questions to reassure the wary. Zane kept pointing out that most of the species they encountered would not be a threat under normal circumstances. But the creatures inhabiting this place were different. They all believed they were free, living the good life. It made no sense. These apartments were no better than slums. They were basically destitute. Yet they were devoted to Hestia beyond all else. Zane turned to look at Lonnie. They're brainwashed. Lonnie believed him. Another attack. And another. Door after door they slammed shut together, each time with a nod of thanks. Both Lonnie and Zane recognized that this mission would be impossible on their own. Zane gave the signal, respect and communication flowing between them as they reached the only apartment on the 30th floor. They were halfway there. Weapons raised, they prepared for another onslaught like the last 4 floors. Zane knocked. No answer. They pulled open the pair of double doors to reveal a large living room. Another door stood off to the left. There was a splashing sound from behind it. Lonnie walked slowly forward as Zane caught movement out of the corner of his eye. A young woman, a finder, sat huddled on a small shabby couch in the corner of the room. Zane felt his weapons drop to the ground with a dull thud. She didn't look up. Lonnie opened the second door. A man with sharp claws and tribal tattoos covering most his body lounged in a bathtub in the middle of the room. Zane kneeled down in front of the finder, his hands shaking. It was only then that she raised her lethargic gaze to his. "Zane," she whispered, not quite believing her glassy eyes. "Zora, his sister. What are you doing here?" Her fangs has been filed down. Her claws clipped, brittle and broken. Her tattoos were faded, dulled as if magic had been stripped from her skin. Her injuries were very old. How long had she been here? "Why? When was the last time you were in the water?" he asked softly. She was showing signs of irreversible dehydration. "I have no idea." She looked mildly intrigued by the question. Zane felt his body burn with rage. "Why are you living here?" "Why wouldn't I be? I have nowhere else to go." Zora inspected him carefully. "Why are you human? Is this a dream?" Zora's eyes lit with understanding. "Are you here to have Hestia fix you? She's in the penthouse." Zane felt his eyes spill over with tears. He brushed them away. Lonnie reappeared in the doorway, his face filled with dread. "There's something wrong with the creature in there." He nodded towards the other room. "Zarek's been like that for years," Zora insisted to Lonnie. Zane felt himself freeze. His brother. He got to his feet and approached Lonnie. "My kind," he explained with a deadly quiet. "My family. My siblings." Lonnie's questioning stare widened, his face losing what little color had been left on it. "You have to get them out of here." The words weren't even out of his mouth when the building began to tremble, the floor shaking beneath them. "The rock dwellers must be at it again," Zora mused, examining the shaking walls. Zane turned to Lonnie. "Go on without me, I'll catch up. My sister says Hestia's at the top. Go straight there." Lonnie nodded, not keen on the idea of splitting up, but his sole focus now was to get to Sera. "I'll see you at the top," he confirmed with an attempt at lifting Zane's morale. He reached out his hand as if it were an oath. "Yes." Zane's fury rippled around him as he reached out and grasped Lonnie's hand in return. "At the top." Zane stalked into the adjoining room. "Zarek," he breathed, shock slamming through him. He was staring at his brother. There was no response. Zarek's gray eyes were empty. He didn't blink. He still had his fangs and claws, but he was catatonic. Zane pushed down his emotions. Hestia was going to pay dearly for the damage she'd done. Chapter 44. Top of the tower. Sera hadn't spoken in hours. Her mind was numb. She was empty. She sat perfectly still, watching the storm rage all around her as the fainter rounds of screams reached her. The noise was far beneath her, but still it sounded like alarms ringing in her ears. She flinched occasionally at a particularly awful sound, but otherwise she remained fixed, the portrait of a young, composed woman who was dying inside. Her mother. The last one to betray her. Sera vowed in that moment she would never give her heart again, to anyone. She would lock away her humanity and cease to exist as her old self. She'd already accepted the fact that Zane was dead, and that no one was coming to help her. She gave herself over to the inevitability that Lonnie and Hestia had conspired to take everything from her. She swore that she would destroy them both. She would bring this building down on itself even if it meant her own death. At least then she might have the chance to see Zane again, to tell him she loved him. Why hadn't she told him? A single tear slid from her vivid violet eyes. Though the cold, unfeeling bracelet did not allow her to access her power, Sera could sense the magic burning against her skin. It was becoming more painful by the second. What was her mother waiting for? Did she truly believe that Zane was still a threat? He wouldn't come here. He wouldn't know how to find her, even if he had survived. She'd given up on that hopeful thought the second she realized her mother was somehow behind this. The building began to tremble beneath her. Sera's expression of lost hope did not leave her. Let it all come down, she thought. It had been hours since her mother reappeared, sitting silently at the large ornate desk to Sera's left. She was knitting and humming to herself softly, as if nothing were amiss. The sword Lonnie had wielded at Zane sat like a trophy above the large fireplace behind her. Sera had no clue what her mother was up to, only that it had been under her order to have Sera sentenced to this prison. Would she ever be free? Would her mother keep her locked up here until she was married? Would Lonnie devise a jail of his own for her to reside in? She wouldn't give him the opportunity. Where was her supposed fiancé? Why hadn't he shown his cowardly face? How much did he know? Sera felt a scream bubbling in her throat, but she swallowed it down to rest alongside her explosive rage. She knew if she started screaming now, she would never stop. Lonnie tore up the stairs as fast as his legs would allow him, his shoes slipping precariously across each step. He was almost there. Just a few more floors and Sera would be in his arms. He thought of Zane, of Hestia, of all his simmering regrets and undeniable mistakes as he vowed in that moment to give his all. Sera's eyes snapped to the door as it was ripped open. She felt her heart stop momentarily before it began to beat with rapid intention. For one split second, her treacherous mind had envisioned it would be Zane bursting through the door. A bitter smile fell to her lips as she gazed upon Lonnie. He was slightly limping, a bruise marring his otherwise unblemished features. His gaze was wild as it locked on her. He was already stumbling to his knees in front of her. Sera didn't bother to expect help. He was going to put on the same show as her mother. "Sera," he rasped, his hands quickly moving over her as he checked for injuries, his jaw tight with panic. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine," she said without an ounce of emotion. Lonnie stared at her granite-like features. "Thank the gods." Sera hissed in his face. "Stop playing games," she spat. "I know you are in on this." "What?" Lonnie shook his head. "You've got it all wrong, Zane is." But he stopped at the sound of a chair scrapping across the floor. He looked up. Hestia. He hadn't even noticed her presence, his attention so fixated on Sera. "Zane." Sera's gaze was frantic as she searched his features for deception. "Zane is what?" But Lonnie was no longer listening to her. His gaze honed in on Hestia, watching her every movement as she placed her knitting needles on the desk and came around the side, her heels clacking with even strides. She exuded confidence. Every bit of logic in Sera's brain was telling her not to trust Lonnie. He'd already proved himself a liar once. She would be stupid to listen to him now, especially when every bit of evidence pointed to his inclusion in this scheme. But even now as she looked at him, she wasn't seeing the man, she was seeing the boy, her best friend, the only other person who accepted her for who she was. Sera closed her eyes. She was filled with such immense loss it almost broke her. But she would give him this chance. One last time. "Lonnie, darling," began Hestia. "Whatever are you doing here? I said I would bring your bride to you." Under her soft tone, Lonnie could hear her rage bubbling. "Drop the act," he snapped. "I already told you I'm done with your games." He turned to face her fully. Hestia gasped at his battered appearance. "What happened to you? Did you get him?" Lonnie moved smoothly forward, his smile serene. "He's here. Somewhere." Hestia's smile remained on her face as her gaze darkened with wrath. "We have a visitor. Isn't that lovely, Sera?" A drop of sweat slid down Sera's back, her breath short as realization slammed into her. Zane was here. Her magic pulsed with a wave of power, washing over her and straining against the leather straps and cold stone. "She's not well, I fear," Hestia pouted, indicating towards Sera. "What she needs most, I expect, is some affection from her betrothed." Lonnie swallowed the bile in his throat as he gazed at the wicked woman. "Aren't you going to give your fiancé a proper greeting?" Hestia commanded. Lonnie looked at Sera. She looked at him. A silent conversation passed quickly. It was something they'd done since they were kids. Lonnie took a deep breath. Sera gave him a slight nod. Lonnie prayed to the universe, the gods, the soul itself, that this wouldn't be the last time their lips met. He pressed his hands against the chair, precisely on top of her wrists, then swiftly covered her lips with his. Sera concentrated on Lonnie's fingers, loosening the straps that she was tied to. His mouth fell over hers slowly, again and again. Sera pressed her eyes tightly together, trying not to remember the times before. Lonnie pulled back with a sharp breath, his eyes deeper than usual. He took a second to collect himself before he turned back to Hestia. "Are you satisfied?" he spat. Hestia laughed, shaking her head as she inspected her daughter's blushing face. "There might be hope for you yet, darling." Sera remained silent still. The last thing she needed was to draw attention to the fact that she could slip out of her restraints with no issue. "I guess we have some time to kill," her mother mused with sardonic humor. "After everything Lonnie has done for you, it's only fair that I reveal the truth in order to give you a chance at happiness. After all," Hestia's eyes were filled with devious intent. "It's what he's owed." Lonnie tried to hide the shame that crested his eyes, but Sera still caught it. She felt her heart drop in anguish. What had he done? Yes, Hestia went on. It's true that Lonnie went to prison, that he paid for various offenses committed. She let the words hang heavy on the air between them.
Sera stopped breathing.
Lonnie took all the responsibility for my crimes. Investment fraud isn't difficult to manage when the downtrodden are desperately looking for a way up and out of the gutter. You know, Sera, the people of the city trust you. It was easy to use your name in order to further my own goals. Sera's eyes were locked on her mother. She couldn't stop the pulsing rage taking over every inch of her body. She needed to calm down, the magic was too much. She took deep breaths. Lonnie watched on, his concern growing by the second. So Lonnie agreed, he'd take my punishment. He'd sacrifice just to ensure that I would stop at nothing to make you his wife. And as you can see, I've held up my end of the bargain. Hestia took a step forward. Your powers are growing, Sera, just imagine what we can do. We will rule this island together. Once and for all. We will subdue those beneath us, take what we must and thrive. It's the only way. Don't you see? A sob of anguish tore from Sera's throat as she hung her head, her shoulders heaving with distress. Darling, please don't cry. I'm doing this all for you. Lonnie couldn't take any more. He lunged for the sword, vaulting over the desk and tearing it from the wall. He grasped it in his palm, twisting around to meet Hestia. She laughed and threw her hand up. Black smoke whooshed from her skin, slamming into Lonnie as he was thrown into the sharp corner of the stone fireplace. I had a feeling you were up to something naughty, Lonnie. You know I never gave you permission to come here. I don't need permission when you've locked up Sera. You have taken everything. I won't let you hurt her. Hurt her? Hestia cackled with disbelief. I would never hurt Sera. You are killing her as we speak, he roared, pulling himself together and once again moving to strike the shadow that used him all these years. Your father was right about you, always so pathetic, always so weak. I offer you up the perfect opportunity, get your bride back for you, and you still go against me? You fool. Lonnie felt his rage explode as he sprinted towards Hestia, the sword scalding hot in his hands. He raised it up, feigning right at the last second as he brought the blade down onto the band of obsidian around Sera's wrist. The sword vibrated harshly in his grasp, the impact so great, yet the bracelet did not break. His growl of frustration was drowned out as wicked black lightning struck through the room, shattering the glass and flinging Lonnie against the last wall still standing. He smashed into it with a mighty crack and dropped to the floor as the shards rained down on him. He was dangerously close to the edge. Rain lashed into the room, the wind whipping about them fueled by the power crashing over all. Sera was already on her feet, moving fast. But Hestia was quicker. She turned, once again trapping Sera, this time with her black smoke. Sera's feet skidded to a halt as she was slammed back into the chair. The smoke held her in place as Hestia calmly surveyed the damage. We'll have to find you a new husband, dear, she tooted, pushing against Lonnie's unresponsive body with her polished shoe, contemplating if she should roll him off the top of the tower. No need to worry, I'm already here. Sera's eyes flew to the doorway. Zane, Chapter 45, 4 decades. Sera felt her heart bursting at the sight of him standing there, alive. She let out a cry of relief. Zane's eyes were locked on Sera. His mouth tightened as he stepped into the demolished penthouse, taking in her disheveled and tied-up state. Zane, Sera's voice was cut off by the black smoke, slapping across her mouth. Zane's eyes lit with rage. Hestia turned from her inspection of Lonnie, her head lifting to greet their visitor, a small smile playing on her lips. Zane's attention diverted to Hestia as the two locked gazes. Hestia's amusement slid from her face, surprise, disbelief, and then cruel delight slashed across her features. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere, she insisted, glowing at the arrival of the creature's presence. How long she had waited for this moment. He looked the same as the day she left him to die in those marshlands. You, Zane's voice was low, filled with absolute loathing as he took a step back, sneering at Hestia with a mixture of disgust and shock. Hestia glided forward casually as if they were nothing more than old friends catching up. How long it has been, too long, she smiled. Zane edged his way slowly across the room towards Sera, who was looking between the two with growing confusion. Not long enough, he spat. I've spent much time, energy and resources trying to find you, she informed him. I bet you have. All this, Hestia motioned to the room around them, the building itself, was to bring you back to me. For what purpose? So you could destroy me again. Sera felt her chest tighten. Zane knew her mother. Her mother had destroyed Zane. I wasn't trying to kill you, she insisted. I was young, still in the experimental stages of discovering the depth of my powers, she explained with a light shrug. Besides, I don't see what you're so upset about. A chiseled body that can eat grease and fat without losing an ounce of perfection? How tiresome to be blessed with never-ending youth. Please. Zane tightened his grip on the baseball bat in his hand, knowing it would do absolutely nothing to stop the sorceress. I've seen your experiments, Zane hissed. The torture chambers downstairs. Those haven't been used in years. I was a bit wild back when you and I crossed paths, Hestia admitted. It wasn't personal. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. As if that excused it all. And what were you hoping to accomplish? She ignored him. I found more humane ways to help my magical creatures since then. You know, Zane, after our little mishap out in the marshes, I turned away from experiments and instead chose to care for my creatures. They are happy here, working for me. Zane felt his head throb with rage, thinking of Zora and Zarek. They aren't yours. But they are. Some more obedient than others, but nonetheless, all are under my control. She continued to pursue him, attempting to back him into a corner. You've lost your looks, Zane commented offhandedly. He'd finally reached the center of the room. He positioned himself between this mad woman and Sera. He stared at the aged sorceress with hatred etched across every inch of his face. Sera continued to fight desperately against her mother's magic. She could feel her power stronger than before, even with the bracelet still on, but she could not break free. She chanced a glance at Lonnie. He wasn't moving. Hestia tittered lightly, but her eyes turned black with vindictiveness. And you still haven't learned your place. She took a step closer. I've sent countless monsters to find you, to search for you across every inch of this island, and yet here you are, having been hiding under my nose for all these years. And then by such sweet fate, you happen to meet my daughter. All of the pieces slammed into place. Zane knew Sera would be with her mother, but he hadn't let his logic catch up to come to the most obvious conclusion of all. Sera Hastings was the sorceress who cursed him, and he'd fallen in love with her daughter. Zane felt poison spill through his veins, the bitter taste of irony that he'd never been able to escape from. Hestia was positively beaming with pleasure as she watched Zane make the connection. She had him now. She cleared her throat, her fingers tightening around the extra obsidian band that she always carried on her person. It was almost obvious, she bragged. I keep tabs on every monster that enters the city. My spies told me you were a man, a cook at some ramshackle diner. I figured you were no threat, just another charity case for Sera to waste her time helping. But if it made her happy, I'd let her be. Sera was always a good girl. I knew I could trust her not to do something stupid. So imagine my surprise when I find my daughter scouring the library for books on confinement spells, claiming that she needed to help a friend. Sera closed her eyes with horror. She had practically handed Zane over to his tormentor, her mother. But Hestia wasn't finished. And then Lonnie, poor Lonnie. Both Zane and Sera's eyes snapped to the man who was stirring on the floor, but barely. He came to me, desperate for help. He vowed to kill you. You're lying, Zane countered. Lonnie told me how you twisted his mind with your shadow magic, how you gave him the sword to kill me. Not to kill you, just to confirm my suspicions, that Sera's newest pet wasn't a human after all, but a monster, the only monster not under my control in my city. And what did you expect me to do as a mother? After my only child disappeared? I sent the Gry to bring you back, yet you continued to run. What choice did we have? I was trying to protect her. Zane ground out with absolute truth. Hestia cocked her head to the side with interest. You really are so human. Tell me, do you love my daughter? Emotions rolled through Zane, ripping the breath from him. Lonnie groaned from behind them. Do you feel a special connection to her? Number one told me all about it, Hestia remarked. Her favorite Gyri had done well. She said she could taste your connection when they searched for you in the desert. This connection is because Sera. Zane couldn't say the words. Devastation, fury slashing across his features. Hestia's soft patronizing tone slid across his skin. Have you caught up to speed then? The only reason you feel that connection to my daughter is because of me, the power I gave up to you unwillingly by accident. The constitution of your mind made you a formidable opponent. I confess that by trying to contain you, to make you the crowning jewel of my subjects, I was greatly damaged. And yet you did not think to stop? My goals shifted. I spent years building my empire, acquiring new creatures, tenants. I even foolishly fell in love. Hestia's face contorted with grief and rage. It took me 5 years to realize what attempting to confine you had cost me. I began to lose in life. As if you were the one who'd cursed me, money, time, love torn from me. The only thing I had left was Sera and my power, my drive. I almost gave up. Hestia raised her chin defiantly. But then I awoke one morning to discover what you actually took from me that day. It meant you were most certainly alive based on my research, but much time had passed. Hestia wiped at the tears falling from her wicked eyes as she let out a laugh. That was when I decided to open Hastings Apartments, a refuge for creatures who no longer wanted to risk living on their own. They were searching for food, community, a purpose. Her eyes hardened with manic intent. I provided these things. I've kept them safe from humanity for all of these years, and in return, they have been searching for you. That is all I have asked of them. I hope too that you might find your way here. So you could trap me. So I could offer you something in return. I would have given you back your form, your abilities. Hestia closed the space between them swiftly. But that was before you put your hands on what is not yours. Zane couldn't help but infuriate her, push her a little bit further. Not just my hands. Hestia's skin was crackling with magic, as Zane watched the tiny sparks of black light pop across her skin. You must know that your feelings for Sera are not real. They are only a mirror, a reflection. Once the curse is broken, and my immortality is restored to me, Sera will mean nothing to you. So do you see now, Zane? How cruel your actions have been. Do you see you are the one who will hurt Sera most in the end? Zane didn't want to believe her, but the satisfied expression Hestia was giving him told Zane he could not hide the fear and anguish in his eyes. I can see I've put you in a pickle, she laughed again. But I'm not some unfeeling monster. I am more than willing to offer you another deal. I don't make deals with monsters like you. Zane couldn't look at Sera. He was terrified if he did he'd come apart at the seams, lose his mind at the pain she was experiencing. He could feel her power pulsing in the air. Hestia ignored him. All I want is for you to give me back what you took and in return. Took? Zane laughed darkly. You're the one who stole from me. Only what was rightfully mine to steal. As a Dekla, I am above you, your master. Submit to me and I will release your monster. I'll let you live.
No sans pas.
Then we have reached the end of this conversation. I have everything now. All that I wanted has come to pass with one tiny exception. The last piece missing. Hestia raised her hand slowly, black smoke pouring from her skin. Her mouth twisted with conviction. Now give me back my youth. Chapter 46. Cruel Choices. You're going to regret this, Hestia calmly explained as she shot her wicked magic in Zane's direction. He dove out of the way just as the black lightning smashed into the spot he'd been standing seconds before. Zane rolled quickly to his feet, his eyes calculating the sorceress' next move. I thought you wanted to break the curse, Hestia continued as she sent another bolt of magic his way. Zane ducked, but the lightning caught him on the side of his arm, singeing his skin with a ferocious burn. Zane gritted his teeth as he continued this dangerous dance. It's the ultimate paradox, you know, your condition, she laughed. Despite the fact that Zane knew she was trying to distract him, his curiosity burned at her words. In what way? There is always a peaceful way to break a curse, an alternative to what you have chosen when you decided to defy me. You've had the power this entire time to change your form. It's simple for someone who can control their emotions. Yet that has always been your problem, hasn't it? Your stubborn nature has not allowed you to see what has been in front of you all along, making such an easy task that much more difficult. Not that it matters anymore, now I will be the one to return you to your form. And then you will be mine to control. She lifted her hand to dangle the obsidian bracelet at him with taunt. Zane slid behind Sera, his feet moving across the crushed glass all around them. The winds were growing, howling through the exposed room, making it difficult to stay balanced. Give up, Hestia commanded. You're outmatched. There's no way you are going to get out of here alive. Sera is lost to you. You have no other reason to fight. I will always fight against those who oppress others, he spat. You sound like Sera's father. He was an idealist as well. He couldn't handle my lifestyle, my dreams meant nothing to him. As if I would subject my daughter to the same treatment. How could I let her break her own heart with the likes of you? Let Sera go, she has nothing to do with our past. She has everything to do with it, you foolish man. I knew the only way to secure your visit would be to keep her here, away from you. There's nothing you can ever do that would keep me from Sera. Well, see about that, Hestia whispered, her magic once again smashing into the space Zane stood only moments before. He slid through the glass, once again rushing to his feet, but Hestia was quick, enraged at this game of cat and mouse. She threw herself forward with a colossal blast of power, catching Zane straight in the chest. He roared with anguish as the power struck into him once more. It was different than last time. When he'd encountered the sorceress in the marsh, her magic had been white, fiery and excruciating. It was nothing compared to what she was doing now. Zane felt as if his chest were being split open, as if invisible nails were digging away at his insides. Hestia gritted her teeth, pushing as hard as she could. His rage was burning up her magic, fighting back. She had to draw her immorality from him. She could feel her skin tingling, her youth hanging in precarious balance as she tore at his human form. Zane's thoughts were chaotic, unhinged. He could feel his natural form just beneath the surface screaming to get free. He felt the bonds of humanity snapping, but his mind continued to focus on Sera.
Sera. Sera. Sera.
He thought over and over again as his knees buckled, his hand smacking into the glass splayed across the floor. His back arched as Hestia's magic barreled into him. There was no stopping her. Once she could get close enough to snap that bracelet onto him, this would all be over. Just like old times, she hissed with a smile, her eyes swallowed up by black magic. She took another step forward, her body trembling under the weight of her task. This was not like before. Something was different. Zane's wail of pain slashed through Sera's heart like a razor. She was fighting with everything she had, she was getting close. But that sound, the one of her lover reaching defeat, was the thing that undid her. The black smoke was flung aside with ease as Sera stumbled to her feet with an explosive blast of purple light. The bracelet of obsidian burst open, the pieces crumbling to the floor, nothing more than dust. Enough! She roared, stalking across space to reach her mother. Hestia looked up in awe. A split second before Sera's power crashed into her, sending her flying backwards and breaking her hold over Zane. He collapsed, his chest heaving but his eyes locked on Sera. Sera was staring at her mother. Hestia recovered from the blast, shaking her head. Darling, you really don't want to do this. Sera felt the magic roll deep inside her, flames of purple expanding and growing around her form. She lifted her hands and shot another burst of power directly into her mother's chest. Hestia blocked it, sending her own magic whipping towards Sera. The black lightning caught Sera on her cheek, slicing her skin. Sera didn't bother to acknowledge the wound. It was nothing compared to the mental anguish she was experiencing. With a shout of wrath, she brought her arms up, hurling her powers into Hestia. This time with even greater strength. Hestia staggered under the force as she deflected Sera's magic that was rapidly firing. One blast after another. Sera, I'm your mother, Hestia panted, her feet unsteady. She couldn't catch a second wind as Sera's furious gaze pounded into her. Purple light sent shocks through Hestia's body as Sera continued her onslaught. This is the last time you hurt others, Sera promised. Her powers were so vast. Now that she was in control of them, they listened to her with ease. This magic felt as natural as breathing. Hestia threw up a wall of her black smoke, switching into a defensive position. Sera was stronger than she'd anticipated. Sera advanced towards her mother with growing confidence, pushing back her magic inch by inch. Surrender. Calm down, we can talk this out. I have nothing to say to you, Sera hissed as she conjured up a vast bubble of purple light. It glowed around her with fierce throbbing energy. Love will make you weak, Sera. This is not the path you want to choose. You don't get to give me advice anymore. Hestia glanced behind her. She'd been pushed back to the very edge of the room, the drop off the top of the building only inches away. We were supposed to be in this together, she insisted. Sera felt her magic boiling with fury. That's why you lied to me for my entire life? Hurt the people I care about? Shackled me and confined me here? What part of your actions have been about us being together? Sera, please. He's only going to hurt you. In the end, this is the best course of action. You can't mean to choose him over me. You've chosen everything over me. Your power, your money, your secrets. You have never cared about me. That's not true, her mother begged, holding her shield in place, arms trembling under the crushing weight of the violet magic. I only kept you in the dark to protect you. Stop saying that. Sera screamed as she surged her magic one last time, feeling all of her pent-up powers release. She thought of Lonnie, of Zane, of the hundreds of creatures beneath her feet who were powerless. She was fighting for them. Her emotions rose like a tidal wave, sweeping high across the room before crashing over Hestia. Her mother slammed into the floor with a crack as the magic consumed her, tightly trapping her in place. Sera's body swayed as the magic drained itself, but she wasn't done yet. She moved forward and dropped to her knees in front of her mother's defeated form. Hestia was looking at her with tears shining in her eyes. You are extraordinary, Hestia breathed, eyeing the magic all around her with pride. Sera ignored her comment, reaching out to grasp the bracelet that had fallen from her mother's hand. Sera snapped it around her wrist without a second of hesitation. Hestia stared at the obsidian band with a gasp, her powers locking tightly inside. She shuddered at the loss as Sera released her from her magic. Hestia didn't move. She waited for what would come next. Sera's breathing was harsh as she got to her feet, looking down at her mother with grim determination. It's over. Hestia smiled a bit. It's never over, dear. For you it's only just